she tended the dying Apache chief for 40 nights, he awoke changed forever. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast land of sun-baked earth and whispering winds. Life here was never easy. The villagers who lived near the edges of the desert had learned early that survival demanded patience, courage, and a kind of quiet strength that could only grow from years of facing hardship. Among them lived Mara, a young woman who had earned a quiet reputation as a healer. She was not like the others in her village. While many feared what they did not understand, Mara had a natural curiosity and a heart too large to ignore those in need. She spent her days collecting herbs, learning the old remedies from her grandmother, and listening to the stories of the elders who had survived harsh winters and scorching summers. Mara's home was small, built from sun-dried bricks and worn timber, with a garden where she grew medicinal plants. It was simple, but it was a place of life and warmth. People sometimes whispered that Mara had an unusual gift. She could sense the pain of others in a way that seemed almost magical. When someone was hurt, it was as if she could feel it in her own body. And yet, despite her talent, she was often misunderstood. Villagers sometimes called her strange, even dangerous, because they did not understand her knowledge of herbs and her quiet confidence. But Mara never minded. She had learned long ago that helping others was more important than worrying about what people thought. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, a strange sound carried across the village. The wind shifted, bringing with it a low, urgent call. Mara sensed it immediately, a feeling deep in her chest that told her someone needed her help. She hurried to the edge of the village, where she saw a group of men carrying a figure on a makeshift stretcher. At first she thought it might be another traveler, injured from the harsh desert journey. But as they drew closer, she realized this was someone extraordinary. On the stretcher lay an Apache chief, a man whose presence seemed to fill the air around him. Even in his weakened state, there was a strength in him, a dignity that demanded respect. His clothes were tattered from battle, and his skin bore the marks of hardship, but his eyes, though closed, held a quiet power that could not be ignored. The villagers stepped back, wary. They had heard stories of the Apache tribes, fierce warriors who were proud and proud-hearted. Many feared that this man's presence could bring trouble. Mara, however, felt only a deep, urgent need to help. The chief's own people had brought him under a flag of truce, seeking a safe place where he could rest and be tended to. Mara's heart pounded as she realized the weight of the responsibility before her. The man was gravely ill, perhaps near death, and every moment mattered. The villagers murmured among themselves, questioning Mara's decision to take him in. Why would she risk herself? Some asked. He is not ours. He is dangerous. But Mara knew better than to let fear guide her actions. She stepped forward, her hand steady despite the storm of worry in her mind, and offered to care for him. Bringing the chief into her home was no small task. He was heavy, and his breathing was shallow, each exhale a struggle. Mara guided the men carefully, laying him down on a bed she had prepared with clean sheets and soft blankets. She set out bowls of water, herbal remedies, and cloths for cleaning his wounds. Her movements were deliberate, calm, and precise, the result of years of preparation and quiet study. The chief remained still, barely reacting to the care being given, but Mara did not falter. She worked silently, speaking soft words that she hoped might soothe him, though he made no sound. The first night was long. Mara stayed awake by his side, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing and tending to the small injuries that might grow worse if ignored. She cleaned each wound carefully, applied the poultices she had prepared, and whispered encouragement, though she knew he could not hear her yet. The desert night was cold, and the wind crept in through the cracks of the small house, but Mara did not leave. She wrapped herself in blankets beside him, keeping a constant vigil. She had faced many challenges in her life, but none as daunting as this. Here was a man who had survived battles, hardship, and the unforgiving desert, yet now he depended entirely on her. As the nights passed, Mara began to notice small signs of life in the chief. A twitch of a finger, a shallow inhale that was deeper than the last, a faint flicker of eyelid movement. These tiny signs were enough to fill her with hope, though she knew the road ahead would be difficult. The villagers, who had watched from a distance, slowly began to see her determination. Some were impressed, some still fearful, but all could not help but notice the way Mara devoted herself completely to the chief's care. Despite his unconscious state, the chief's presence seemed to fill the house. There was a quiet tension in the air, a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Mara spoke to him as if he could understand every word. She told him stories of the desert, of the herbs she collected, and of the animals that roamed the sands at night. She shared memories of her grandmother, lessons of patience, resilience, and compassion. Though he could not respond, Mara felt that these stories, these small offerings of human connection, might reach him in ways she could not see. Mara also prepared herself mentally for what lay ahead. She knew that healing the body was only part of her task. A man like this, proud and fierce, carried more than just physical wounds. His spirit had endured battles, losses, and betrayals. To help him truly, she would need patience, understanding, and a gentle strength that could match his own. She reflected on the stories she had heard from her grandmother about the importance of listening, of bearing witness to another's pain without judgment. It was this wisdom that would guide her through the nights to come. The villagers, initially skeptical, began to notice a change. Mara's courage and skill were undeniable, and even those who had doubted her started to whisper their approval. Some brought small offerings of food or clean water, helping where they could without disturbing the fragile trust Mara had established. Others stayed away, unsure of the man they called a chief, but Mara welcomed their support quietly. She knew that the work she was doing was important, and that it would take every ounce of strength she had. As the days passed, the chief's body remained fragile, but Mara's hope did not waver. She learned to read the subtle signs of his condition, adjusting her treatments with careful observation. Each day brought small victories, a stronger breath, a slight movement of a hand, a flicker of the eye. Mara celebrated these moments quietly, knowing that even the smallest progress was meaningful. She spoke to him softly each day, not expecting a reply, but hoping that her voice would offer comfort. Through it all, Mara discovered a deep connection to the man she tended. Though he remained unconscious, she felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just for his survival, but for his dignity and spirit. She prepared him for the long journey ahead, knowing that healing was more than mending wounds. It was about restoring hope and trust. And though the desert outside remained harsh and unforgiving, Mara's home became a sanctuary, a place of care, patience, and quiet determination. By the end of the first part of her journey, Mara had already begun to see the potential for transformation. The chief, though still unconscious, had begun to awaken a sense of trust in her, and Mara, in turn, discovered strength she had not fully realized in herself. This was only the beginning of a long and difficult path, but one that promised to change both their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. In the vast desert, under the endless sky, the stage was set for a story of courage, compassion, and the remarkable power of human connection. The days following the chief's arrival were filled with tension and uncertainty. Though Mara tended to him with care, the man remained weak and unresponsive. His breathing was shallow, and the wounds he carried from battles past were severe. It was clear that he had not only faced physical struggles but had endured hardships that weighed heavily on his spirit. Mara understood that healing him would not be easy. She spent hours each day carefully preparing herbal mixtures, grinding roots and leaves into pastes, and boiling them into healing teas. Each remedy required precision. Even a small mistake could cause more harm than good. The villagers watched Mara from a distance, their curiosity mixed with fear. Many had lived all their lives in the shadow of conflicts with the Apache tribes, and the presence of the chief stirred old memories and worries. Some whispered that she was taking too great a risk, that she could be putting the village in danger. Others doubted whether she could truly heal a man who had suffered so much. Mara paid little attention to the gossip. Her focus was entirely on the chief, on his fragile body and the faint signs of life that she clung to like precious jewels. Each day, Mara noticed small but meaningful changes. At first it was only a subtle movement, a hand twitching, a finger flexing, or a shallow breath that was slightly stronger than the one before. These moments, though tiny, filled her with hope. She spoke to the chief softly, as if her words could bridge the gap between his suffering and his awareness. "You are safe here," she whispered. "You will live, and you will heal. I am with you." Though he remained silent, she felt that her words reached him in some way, comforting him even if he could not respond. The chief, despite his weakened state, carried an air of pride and stubbornness. He refused to speak, to acknowledge the world around him, and his eyes often remained closed as though shutting out everyone and everything. Mara understood that this was not just illness. It was pride, grief, and the pain of a life filled with battles, both on the land and within himself. She realized that the path to his recovery would require more than medicine. It would require patience, understanding, and respect for the life he had lived. At night, when the desert winds howled outside, Mara stayed vigilant. She monitored the chief's breathing, adjusted his blankets, and kept his wounds clean. The nights were long, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, but she could not leave him alone. Every sigh, every shallow breath reminded her that his life hung by a fragile thread. She worked tirelessly, knowing that the smallest effort could mean the difference between life and death. The silence of the house, broken only by the crackling of the small fireplace, was filled with a tension that was almost unbearable. Mara felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, but she also felt a strange strength rising from within. As the days passed, the chief began to respond in subtle ways. His eyes would flicker open for a brief moment, and he would follow Mara with a gaze that was faint but attentive. At first, these moments were so fleeting that Mara wondered if she had imagined them, but slowly, the signs became clearer. He began to react to her presence, to her voice, and even to the gentle touch of her hands as she applied healing ointments. Mara celebrated these small victories quietly, understanding that each step forward was a triumph in its own right. However, the process was not without setbacks. Some days, the chief's condition worsened, his fever spiked, his breathing grew more labored, and his body seemed weaker than before. These moments tested Mara's resolve. She would sit by his side for hours, applying compresses, giving him sips of water, and speaking words of encouragement. She refused to give in to despair, even when the nights felt endless and the village's whispers grew louder. Mara knew that the chief's survival depended not only on her knowledge of herbs and remedies, but also on her unwavering dedication. Mara also faced emotional challenges. Caring for a man who was so strong yet so vulnerable brought out deep feelings she had never experienced before. She felt sorrow for his pain, frustration at his resistance, and a fierce determination to help him overcome his suffering. She often reflected on the stories her grandmother had told her about patience, empathy, and the power of kindness. These lessons guided her every action, reminding her that true healing involved both the body and the spirit. The chief's pride remained a constant obstacle. He would sometimes tense up when Mara tried to clean his wounds or apply ointments. At times he would flinch or turn his head away, as if refusing to acknowledge that he needed help. Mara did not take these reactions personally. Instead, she approached each moment with patience, speaking softly and moving slowly, letting him know that he was safe and that she respected his strength. Over time, he began to accept her care, allowing her to tend to his wounds with less resistance. Mara also noticed changes in herself. The long nights, the endless work, and the emotional intensity of caring for the chief brought out a resilience she had not fully recognized. She discovered a depth of strength and courage that surprised her. Each day she felt more confident in her abilities and more certain of her purpose. The chief's trust, even in its smallest forms, became a source of motivation, pushing her to continue even when fatigue threatened to take over. The village continued to watch, some with admiration and some with suspicion. Mara did not mind. She understood that her duty was not to win approval but to save a life. She welcomed the small gestures of support from those who offered help, such as bringing fresh herbs or clean water, but she relied on her own knowledge and skill above all else. Every action, every choice she made was guided by her commitment to the chief's recovery. As the chief slowly regained strength, the bond between him and Mara began to grow, though it remained unspoken. There were moments when he would follow her movements with his eyes, when a faint nod or shift in his body suggested acknowledgement. Mara treasured these moments, knowing that they marked progress in a relationship built on trust, patience, and care. She realized that this connection was as important to his healing as the herbs and remedies themselves. During this time, Mara also learned about the chief's life through the small clues he revealed. The stories etched in his scars, the way he held himself, and the brief glimpses of emotion in his eyes told a story of bravery, loss, and resilience. Mara listened to these silent tales with empathy, understanding that healing him required recognizing the life he had lived and the burdens he carried. Each discovery deepened her commitment and strengthened the bond between them. By the end of these weeks, the chief was still weak, but beginning to show signs of genuine improvement. His breathing was steadier, his wounds were healing, and he was more responsive to Mara's care. The villagers, who had doubted her abilities, began to acknowledge the remarkable progress. Some offered words of encouragement, while others simply watched in quiet awe. Mara, however, remained focused on the task at hand. She knew that recovery was far from complete, and that the coming days would test both her skill and her patience even further. Through it all, Mara's unwavering dedication created a sanctuary in her home. The desert outside remained harsh and unforgiving, but inside, the chief found safety, care, and compassion. Mara's presence became a constant source of comfort, and though he had yet to speak a word of gratitude, the subtle signs of trust he displayed were enough to sustain her. She continued to tend to him tirelessly, driven by a deep belief in the possibility of healing and the power of human connection. As the sun rose and set each day, Mara and the chief moved slowly along the path from despair to hope. Each small victory, each sign of progress was celebrated quietly, building a foundation of trust and resilience. Mara understood that true healing was a journey, not a destination, and she embraced each challenge with patience and determination. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she also knew that together they could face it. In these early weeks, the story of Mara and the Apache chief became one of quiet heroism, of patience, and of unwavering dedication. The chief's body was slowly recovering, and the beginnings of a bond built on trust were forming. Mara had proven not only her skill as a healer, but also her capacity for empathy, courage, and perseverance. The journey was far from over, but the foundation had been laid, and both their lives were on the path to change. The days turned into weeks, and Mara's dedication never wavered. She had spent countless hours tending to the chief, carefully monitoring his condition, and preparing remedies with meticulous care. Slowly, she began to notice subtle changes that gave her hope. At first it was the smallest of signs, a faint movement of a finger, a twitch of his eyelid, or a shallow breath that was slightly stronger than the last. Each tiny victory, though barely noticeable to anyone else, felt monumental to Mara. She celebrated them quietly, knowing that these small improvements were the first hints of life returning to a man who had been on the brink of death. Despite his progress, the chief remained distant and silent. His eyes, though occasionally opening, seemed to look through the world rather than at it. His pride and stubbornness were palpable. He was a warrior, used to controlling his surroundings, and yet now he found himself completely dependent on another person. Mara understood that healing his body was only part of her work. To truly help him, she would need to reach the deeper parts of his spirit, the places where pride, grief, and distrust had taken root. One afternoon, as Mara was preparing a new herbal mixture, she noticed the chief shifting slightly on the bed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her heart leap with hope. She approached him carefully, speaking in her soft, gentle voice. "You are safe here," she said. "I will not let anything harm you. You are not alone." The chief's eyes opened wider this time, and he focused on her face with a faint but noticeable intensity. Mara felt a thrill of hope. It was the first time he had truly acknowledged her presence. Encouraged by this progress, Mara began to try new ways to reach him. She read stories aloud, telling tales of courage, kindness, and perseverance. She described the desert beyond their home, the animals that roamed at night, the way the sun painted the sky in gold and crimson, and the silent beauty of the stars. Sometimes she sang soft, quiet songs, old lullabies her grandmother had taught her. At first, the chief did not respond. But gradually he began to show subtle signs that he was listening. His breathing would slow and steady when she spoke, and his hands would relax instead of clenching tightly. The turning point came one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. Mara had been sitting beside him for hours, cleaning his wounds and adjusting his blankets. She spoke softly, recounting a story of a warrior who had lost everything but had found strength in unexpected friendship. As she spoke, she noticed his fingers twitching, then his eyes opening fully for the first time in weeks. He looked at her directly, and for the first time, she saw something more than just recognition. She saw trust, a fragile, delicate trust that had taken time to form. Mara's heart swelled with relief and hope. She knew that this moment was significant. The chief, who had resisted every attempt to reach him, was beginning to accept her presence and her care. She spoke to him gently, encouraging him to move his arms and legs slowly, helping him regain strength. The chief responded cautiously, following her instructions with a careful determination. Mara realized that his body was healing, yes, but his spirit was awakening as well. Over the next few days, the chief's progress accelerated. He began to speak in soft, hesitant words, testing the sound of his own voice after weeks of silence. Mara listened patiently, encouraging each attempt, no matter how small. "You are doing well," she said each time. "Every word, every movement is a victory. Here is stronger than you know." The chief, though still reserved, began to engage more actively, asking questions about the herbs, the stories, and even Mara herself. This marked a profound shift in their relationship. Where once there had been silence and suspicion, now there was conversation and connection. The villagers noticed the change as well. Some were amazed at the progress the chief was making under Mara's care, while others still watched cautiously, wary of the powerful man they did not fully understand. Mara, however, remained focused solely on the chief, understanding that healing required patience, attention, and unwavering dedication. She welcomed the small gestures of support from the villagers, but relied on her own skill and intuition above all else. As the chief began to regain his strength, he also began to reveal fragments of his story. He spoke of battles he had fought, friends he had lost, and the weight of responsibility he carried as a leader of his people. Mara listened carefully, offering comfort without judgment. She understood that part of healing was allowing him to share his pain, to acknowledge the burdens he had carried alone for so long. Slowly, the chief began to show glimpses of vulnerability, a side of himself that he had hidden behind pride and strength. One night, as a storm swept across the desert, the chief awoke fully for the first time. He sat up slowly, his eyes meeting Mara's with a mixture of curiosity, gratitude, and something else she could not quite identify. He spoke a single word, soft but clear. "Thank you." Mara felt tears welling in her eyes. The journey had been long, difficult, and exhausting, but in that moment she realized that her patience and dedication had made a difference. The chief, once on the brink of death and distrustful of everyone around him, was beginning to awaken not just to life, but to hope and connection from that night on. Their bond deepened. The chief became more responsive, following Mara's guidance as she helped him regain his strength. He began to sit up without assistance, eat solid food again, and move about the small house with growing confidence. Mara, in turn, learned more about the man he had been and the life he had led. She discovered a profound sense of respect for his courage, his resilience, and the burdens he carried as a leader. Their relationship was built not just on care, but on mutual recognition of strength, courage, and humanity. Mara also began to teach the chief about patience, empathy, and the importance of understanding others. She shared her knowledge of herbs, remedies, and the natural world, explaining how each plant had a purpose and a story. The chief listened attentively, asking questions and showing genuine interest. Mara realized that in teaching him, she was helping him heal not only physically but also emotionally and spiritually. He was learning to trust, to listen, and to appreciate the quiet strength of another human being. The villagers, who had once doubted Mara, now saw her in a new light. Her unwavering dedication, skill, and compassion had transformed a man who had seemed beyond help into someone on the path to recovery. Some villagers came to her for advice, bringing their own sick and injured to her care. Others simply watched, inspired by her courage and resilience. Mara, however, remained humble, understanding that her purpose was not recognition, but service. She continued to focus on the chief, knowing that the work was far from complete and that every step forward mattered. As the weeks continued, the chief's body grew stronger, and his spirit began to shift. He was no longer the silent, distant figure he had been when he first arrived. He smiled occasionally, asked questions, and even laughed quietly at Mara's stories. His eyes, once clouded with pain and distrust, now reflected a growing sense of trust and appreciation. Mara knew that this transformation was profound. She had not only healed his body, but had also helped him reconnect with life, hope, and human connection. The turning point in the chief's recovery marked a new chapter in their story. Mara had proven that patience, empathy, and unwavering dedication could overcome even the deepest wounds. The chief had learned that it was possible to trust, to accept help, and to open his heart after so much pain and suffering. Together, they had created a bond that transcended culture, language, and past conflicts. It was a bond built on respect, courage, and the quiet strength of human connection. By the end of this part of their journey, the chief was no longer just a patient in need of care. He was a man awakening to life, to hope, and to the possibility of change. Mara had guided him through the darkest moments, teaching him that healing was not just about the body, but about the heart and spirit as well. Their story was one of transformation, courage, and the remarkable power of patience, compassion, and trust. By the time the chief had begun to awaken to life, the bond between him and Mara had grown stronger than either had expected. He had regained much of his strength, both in body and spirit, and Mara had learned to read the subtle cues in his expressions and movements. She understood when he needed encouragement, when he needed patience, and when it was time to give him space. Yet, even with this progress, there was one final hurdle. The chief's heart. The pride and pain he had carried for years were deeply rooted, and though his body had healed, his spirit was still guarded. Mara knew that true transformation would require more than medicine. It would require a complete awakening of trust, empathy, and understanding. The days grew longer, and the desert heat pressed upon the small village, but Mara's routine remained unwavering. She would rise before sunrise to gather herbs, prepare remedies, and check on the chief. She tended to him with a mixture of skill and care, never allowing fatigue or frustration to cloud her attention. The chief, now able to move on his own, spent his days observing her work, sometimes helping with simple tasks and asking questions about the plants and their uses. Mara answered patiently, understanding that knowledge and shared experience could open pathways to trust and connection. One morning, after weeks of careful care, the chief attempted something new. He reached out and took Mara's hand in his, an act so simple yet so profound. Mara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She did not withdraw, understanding the courage it took for him to show such vulnerability. Their eyes met, and in that silent moment, something unspoken passed between them. The chief was beginning to let go of the walls he had built around himself, realizing that he could allow someone to care for him without fear or judgment. Mara's heart swelled with hope and quiet pride, knowing that this was a sign of true progress. As the days passed, the chief's awareness and presence in the world grew stronger. He began speaking more confidently, sharing stories of his past with Mara. He spoke of battles he had fought, friends he had lost, and the responsibilities he carried as a leader of his people. At first these stories were brief and halting, but over time they became more detailed and heartfelt. Mara listened with patience, offering comfort and guidance when needed. She did not judge his past actions or question his decisions. Instead, she provided a safe space for him to share his experiences and confront the burdens he had carried alone for so many years. The transformation was not just emotional, but spiritual. The chief began to reflect on his life in ways he had never allowed himself to before. He acknowledged mistakes, regrets, and the pain he had caused and endured. He spoke of forgiveness, not just for others, but for himself. Mara encouraged this reflection gently, guiding him to see that healing was not only about the body, but about understanding, compassion, and acceptance. The chief listened intently, absorbing her words and realizing the depth of the lessons she shared. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in shades of gold and purple, the chief stood on the small porch of Mara's home and looked out across the landscape. He had spent weeks confined indoors, recovering from wounds and illness, and now he saw the desert with new eyes. He noticed the patterns of the sand, the way the wind shaped the dunes, and the quiet beauty of the evening sky. Mara stood beside him, offering a silent presence that had become as essential as air to him. For the first time in many years, the chief felt a sense of peace. He understood that life was fragile, that strength was not only measured in physical prowess, and that connection with others could heal wounds deeper than any battle scar. The villagers began to notice the change in the chief as well. The once quiet, reserved man who had arrived on the brink of death now moved with confidence and calm. He spoke politely to the villagers, showed gratitude for their support, and even offered guidance on ways to prevent conflict and protect the community. Mara observed these changes with quiet satisfaction. She knew that her work had not only healed his body, but had sparked a transformation in his character and outlook on life. The chief, once ruled by pride and suspicion, had begun to embrace trust, compassion, and understanding. The climax of this transformation came unexpectedly one night. Mara had prepared a simple meal and was sitting with the chief, enjoying the cool desert air. They spoke quietly about life, hope, and the lessons they had learned together. The chief paused, looking at Mara with eyes that shone with gratitude and a newfound clarity. "You have saved me," he said softly. "Not just my body, but my life, my heart, my spirit. I do not know how I can repay you." Mara shook her head gently. "You do not need to repay me," she said. "Your life, your healing, and the trust we share are enough. That is all I could ever ask." The chief took a deep breath and reflected on all he had endured, the battles, the losses, and the pain he had carried alone. Now, he realized that he had been given a second chance, a rare gift in a world that often seemed cruel and unforgiving. Mara had shown him the power of patience, kindness, and empathy, teaching him that true strength lay not in dominance or fear, but in connection, understanding, and courage. He felt a wave of emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in years: gratitude, humility, and hope. In the days that followed, the chief became more active in the village, offering guidance to his own people and assisting with tasks that required leadership and skill. He demonstrated patience and understanding in ways he had never done before, using his experiences to teach others the importance of compassion and cooperation. Mara watched these changes with quiet admiration. She knew that the chief's transformation was complete. Not only had he regained his health, but he had also awakened to a new way of living, one that embraced trust, empathy, and the value of human connection. The relationship deepened as well. The chief began to treat Mara not just as a healer, but as a trusted companion and friend. He respected her wisdom, valued her insights, and relied on her guidance in matters of health, strategy, and life. Mara, in turn, continued to offer support, encouragement, and care, understanding that their bond was built on mutual respect, trust, and shared experiences. The connection they had formed over 40 nights of care had become unbreakable, a testament to the power of patience, dedication, and human kindness. The transformation was not limited to the chief alone. Mara herself had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident through the experience. She had faced immense challenges, endured sleepless nights, and navigated the complexities of caring for a proud and guarded man. Through it all, she had discovered the depth of her own resilience, the power of empathy, and the value of unwavering dedication. She realized that healing was as much a journey for the healer as it was for the one being healed. One morning, the chief stood before Mara with a calm and steady expression. He placed his hands over hers and spoke with quiet certainty. "I will never forget what you have done for me. You have given me life, hope, and understanding. I am a different man because of you." Mara smiled, feeling a warmth that words could not fully express. She knew that the journey had been long and difficult, but she also understood that every challenge, every night of vigil, and every act of care had been worth it. The desert, which had once seemed harsh and unforgiving, now appeared full of possibility and life. The chief walked among the dunes with confidence, observing the world with eyes that had learned to see both beauty and wisdom. Mara followed beside him, a constant presence and a reminder of the power of patience, empathy, and human connection. Together they had overcome incredible odds, and their story was now one of hope, transformation, and the enduring strength of compassion. The villagers who had watched from afar began to see the true extent of the chief's change. They recognized the role Mara had played in his recovery, not just as a healer of the body, but as a guide to the heart and spirit. Their respect for her grew, and many sought her wisdom, understanding that true strength came from courage, patience, and empathy rather than force or dominance. Mara remained humble, knowing that her purpose was to serve and care, and that the transformation she had witnessed was a shared achievement born of trust, dedication, and understanding. By the end of this period, the chief had fully awakened, not only in body but in mind and heart. He had learned the value of trust, the importance of compassion, and the power of human connection. He had faced his fears, his pride, and the weight of his past, emerging as a man renewed and transformed. Mara, too, had been changed by the experience, gaining insight, strength, and a deep understanding of the human spirit. Together they demonstrated the remarkable potential for growth, healing, and transformation that lies within every person, given patience, care, and trust.